Hello, I'm Craig Constantine. Welcome. This is the Podcaster Community Show, short conversations that are not just about podcasting because I like to take the scenic route. My guest today is Matthew Jensen. Welcome, Matt. How are you?
I am doing well. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Thanks for. I call this the Battle of Thank Yous. Happens every time. It's one of my favorite parts because I really enjoy. And you and I talked before, everybody knows this by now, unless this is your first episode. Hey, welcome. We talk a little bit beforehand, and I tell, people, I really just love the part that happens between record and stop. I love the interaction. Um, I think this is, I think, self-evident, but there's a lot of magic in understanding somebody else and getting to figure out how they think. And one way to do that is to see what interests them. You're like, oh, how about this? How about that? And then see where their mind goes. I think probably the thing that would be fun to pull on today is I'm curious about what your experience has been. So in your show, what your experience has been. I'm going to say bringing on a co-host because we're just going to say it's all yours. So when you're brought on a co-host, what was like the biggest, I wasn't expecting this new challenge? And maybe what was the biggest, this got much easier when you had that second person involved?
Well, I came to this totally blind, basically, like a lot of people. And when I first started it, I think I did 3 or 4 episodes, and it was just talking to friends about what they did or what they thought about certain topics in a long form. And one of my friends who's an experienced podcaster kind of threw out the idea that he really enjoyed the conversations that we had in person. And if there was some way to bring that online, that would be a cool thing. So yeah, I think a lot of people think that they're maybe not that interesting, but there's always aspects of yourself that people find really interesting. And Mike, who's my co-host, he's a experienced podcaster, has done, I think, about 200 episodes of long form interviews. So we just started talking, and then what we have now is we just talk about, say, current events, how they might affect the future. And Mike, as not a subject matter expert in the areas that I am, asks a lot of questions and tries to learn. So it's been fun.
I think that's a great mix. What's the name of your podcast?
Podcast is the new next.
Sweet. And where can people find it? I'm assuming it's in all the directories. They can find it on, I think it was the new next.libsyn.com is where you can find them on the web or wherever you listen to your podcasts.
Yep.
Somewhere recently, I started getting like this commercial idea in my head where I feel like I always need to like have a plug for the guests thing when I'm doing the show. I don't know. Craig was dropped on his head a lot. Tends to talk about himself in the third person.
Me too.
Do you this is going to get bad. Do you think that, I don't have a co-host, so I'm curious about this. Do you have a balance to like which of you brings the topics to the table? Like, do you spend time like whiteboarding figuratively or literally? This is what next week's episode is going to be, or like I'm in my head, I'm imagining there's a new-ish TV show with Jon Stewart, and they have like the behind the scenes, the writers are in a room and they have a whiteboard and they're like moving post-it notes and they're playing with the dog. And I'm just wondering, like, do you guys get together in person? Do you work virtually? How do you decide what the show is going to be about? Or is it just a complete, and we're pressing record?
I would say that it's tilted towards the complete just press record in many aspects, but Mike and I are friends too. So we'll exchange things that we think that we're interested about. And, I'm technically already prepared because I'm either doing it as part of my career or something that I'm really interested in and learning about. Sometimes we talk about topics. So it's really at the deepest part, we'll have maybe a list. And these are things that we thought that might be interested to talk about, but it's very
loose,
not organized. Yeah.
No, don't say disorganized, say free flowing or dynamic, right?
So it's kind of, I really like how Mike interviews. for someone that I know, I really enjoy talking to him. So it's basically like two friends talking about what they like. We do have a couple of listeners too that will send in questions, and Mike will either, if it goes to Mike, he'll either let me know beforehand, but usually it's a surprise. And on top of that too, we recently started up a submit form on a website where you can basically add questions, and maybe we'll get to them if that's something that we want to touch.
Yeah, we reserve the right to not publish your insane commentary disguised as a question. I can only imagine. Do you think that it's my all right, so my concern for myself is like, yeah, it's the Craig show, like it's I have how could I be somebody else? I don't know. I'm not an actor. And I'm just wondering if you guys try to push grammar, not push each other necessarily, but do you try to push yourselves to like show up in a different way, or to like challenge yourself to say, well, I've had a million conversations with this other person already. I'm going to try and go deeper, or I'm going to try and skip the things that are light because I really want to get his take on this deeper part. So I'm just wondering, have you guys played with that? We'll call that like depth of how you interact.
I I think that I like to push Mike a little bit more to share what he thinks about, because Mike views himself as maybe the host that asks the questions, and I like the back and forth. Like, just because he's not necessarily a subject matter expert, I think that brings out kind of our best conversations is when he's actively learning something or has different perspectives on stuff. So it's still a work in progress, and like everything, right? We're not really sure where it's going to go, but it's fun to talk to someone that I think is equally interested in the topics that we talk about. And I'm a nerd about them, and I've been obsessed with them for years. So for me too, it's a really good learning experience of how to communicate stuff like that to someone who's not necessarily a subject matter expert.
I'm scribbling frantically. I think so. You mentioned getting some feedback and some questions from listeners, and I'm thinking about, do you guys I want to say like a debrief, like do you take the time after you've done the thing to do like the hot after action report, like you slap the headphones off and you go, that sucked, and do you do that, or maybe it was great, but do you do like an immediate hot take of what your first person subjective experience of it was, and then maybe do you like listen and go back later? I'm just wondering like how much you try to close, if at all, do you try and close the loop to like take as much advantage of having that other person, in the mix. So like I'm mostly working by myself. I'll ask you for feedback at the end after we press stop. But beyond that, I don't have a chance really to work with you, over and over and over. So this seems like an opportunity. You're like, oh, here's a person that I can do all these different scales of feedback loops with.
I would say it's a little bit more informal. Like a lot of the recording that we do is later at night. So just because I have young kids and both of us work, but so if we're ending at 10:30, sometimes I'm like, oh, I'm tired. I just need to go.
That was great, Mike.
Yeah,
yeah, right. The energy's like at 2.
Yeah, but otherwise we'll talk for a couple of minutes. Sometimes there's things that we think of during the conversation that it's a topic that we might want to talk about more in depth in the future. Like let's see, what yesterday we had lunch with one of our podcasting fans, and we one of the things that we were talking about was hydrogen fuels for shipping, and we took a note about that, and we'll talk about it in the future. But there's stuff like that sometimes where we'll write it down or add it to a kind of informal list. Sometimes Mike, with his more experience, is like, hey, will you cut that part out? And then usually usually, even if I'm going to, I say that I won't. So, but
Oh, that's rude. Shots fired.
yeah, but no, it's we'll like text back and forth during the week about stuff, and it's it's really informal at this point, and I think both of us are getting used to working together on it. So we're trying to figure out, I I guess, more standards and practices of how we move forward.
Hmm.
But really, it's kind of two friends having conversations like we would normally.
Yeah, I can think of about 17, maybe not 17. I bet you I could think of 7 different ways that I could play with that. The idea of having a co-host. And it's like, all right, we're going to do cold shows where we don't know what we're talking about. And one of us brings the topic and one of us does homework and we try to find things where none of us are subject matter experts or ones where we both are. Or, yeah, we try to do the whole show in Pig Latin and see who loses it first. Lots of ways to play with the medium.
Well, we've talked about eventually having, I would say, maybe live Zoom calls with people that watch the podcast and just have them throw out questions too. So we'll see how that would work, but sounds like it would be interesting.
It depends. It depends on how quick everybody is at being nimble and being able to figure out what's the next best thing to say. And video adds a whole nother level of complexity to it that I intentionally don't want to go anywhere near. It's hard enough and when you're recording remotely, it's hard enough to jam the audio through the internet and get a good quality out of it. And
Yeah.
Zoom is a nightmare, but Zoom's great for video conferencing, like when you just want to talk to someone. But when it comes to podcasting, it's like, whew, world of hurt. What else? Is there anything I often say having a conversation with Craig is like having a stroll down Broadway in New York City. There's like 900 side streets. There's pretzel vendors, my personal nemesis in New York City. There's all these things going on. And a lot of times I'm choosing and pointing and the guests are just kind of like, yeah, where are we going? So I'm like, anything that I've gone by that you wanted to take a peek down an alley or a side street a little bit more in detail?
Well, I was just kind of curious. You obviously run the community and you have a lot of experience in podcasting. What are some of your thoughts on co-hosts and maybe like stuff that you've learned through other people that you think that it would be good for myself and other people to consider?
That's a good question. First of all, I don't. I'm like, have I? Well, I've never done shows where I've had. Oh, well, actually, that's not true. Generally, I haven't done shows where I've had a co-host. Certainly not like a regular series of them where I've had the same person. Um, but I'm going to say it is extremely useful to have another person who's intimately familiar with like your show and what you're doing. So I have a production assistant, a good friend of mine, who is in charge of. She's actually called the guests advocate. It's a Doctor Who joke, like, she cares, so I don't have to. I care, but that's the joke. And her job is to like know the guests for another show that I have and like to figure out when they're available and do all that. And I'm getting to a point, listeners who are rolling their eyes. The conversations that I have with her, like off mic, where we're going somewhere and we're talking about what'd you think of that? How did that go? What about this topic? Why didn't I ask this question? Or next Tuesday is this person. So I haven't had a co-host, but I can tell you if you have somebody who is as crazy, like insanely passionate about the thing that you're doing, that's only going to get better. The more that you talk to that person, be they a co-host or a PA or whatever, the more you get a chance to talk about them in like, yeah, we're not doing anything here. We're not recording. But what'd you think of that? What'd you think of this? What have you seen that you thought would be a good addition to our show? What are we doing that we should take out? So my prediction is that that'll only get better the more you talk about it off mic. So that's the first thing that I thought of. Rapport is another thing, and rapport can cut either way. I'm just thinking of like, the classic radio jockey and the sidekick, like when they get it dialed in, it's just funny, or like it's really good. But when you think about, a classic TV show person doing interviews, or a newscaster, they usually operate by themselves. The morning shows, then they do, we want some light witty banter, but we want to get serious. You usually want to bring in some outside person, and then you have a 2-on-1 if you have a co-host. So that the rapport is good, but it can also make an inside outsider and us them kind of thing when you
Yeah.
bring in another person. So those are two things that I like. If I had a co-host on a show that needed a co-host, I'd be like, that would be what I would be most interested in digging into, those two things.
Yeah, that's a interesting perspective on the outsider for interviews. If you have two people, I've I've definitely seen other podcasts where I've kind of picked up on that.
It's subtle, right? I mean, it
Yeah,
can be really subtle, but it really matters.
yeah. So
I've done a lot of people who listen, blah, blah, blah. We don't need to do the Craig braggy thing. But I've had conversations where the best ones, the most fun ones are when you get people who are partners, like husband, wives, or boyfriend, girlfriend, or whatever. Get people in a relationship, give them 2 microphones, right? I travel with enough gear to do 3 guests. Give people who are in a close personal relationship microphones. Oh, it's so great. You ask them questions, like some of my shows have like a standardized question, and you ask them a question, like, and they look at each other, and like you can still tell so much about a relationship. Like one will look at the other, and then the other one will like a thing, and then there's a little like glimmer, and then one of them will leap on the sword to go first. And it's like there's so much that happens when people have rapport.
yeah.
And I think it's way more fun to bring people who have, like bring in people who have rapport. And then for me to get a chance to like swim in their swimming pool, to go interact with them.
Mm-hmm.
But that's why I'm thinking like, oh, it'd be interesting to see what it's like to find somebody with rapport and then bring people in. I could talk all day. The other thing I will say is, it just turns out that the person that I work with for the other project, I'm a 5'11", 230 pounds, guy, and she's like a 5 foot small, slight female, and we're both married to other people, so like we work a lot together, and we get along really well, and that changes the dynamic with the guest, because like if I come to your house and ring the doorbell, and it's like, oh, it's 2 people, like, these are obviously professional people coming to do a thing. And so having that second co-host could also be a really good way to make that other person feel comfortable. It's just going to depend on the dynamic you and that's a hard word to say, the dynamic you and your co-host have. So there's so many ways that you could slice that. And I think you're going to have a blast slicing that a bunch of different ways.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we, like you said, like having someone that you can talk to about different stuff, especially for me, someone who's done it for a long time, is really nice. Like I learned so much. And someone who's been on your podcast too, Kathy Cox with the Knowledge for Caregivers podcast, she listens to ours also, and she will give us feedback, which is always really nice because it's coming from a fellow podcaster that's also very knowledgeable and creates, a podcast that I personally really like. So it's been nice for me having basically a community already. And podcasters community is cool too, because I've asked questions on there before, and people
they really dogpile with the answers. I just like step back.
It's great.
It's just like 30 people show up with like 30 different ideas, and you're just like, whoa, that'll teach me not to ask first when I have the question.
But it's really good. Like I think it limits the scare factor for doing something like this.
Yeah.
And it's been really helpful to people are just like jump in and do it whatever way that you can, because you'll learn by doing it.
Yeah. Cool. Let's see. That last segment was your question. Any other questions? That was a pretty good one. What else you got?
Let's see. Why did you start the podcaster community?
I started the podcaster community in 2019, was its first incarnation. Because I was a solo podcaster, like working all by myself, and I had done like 30 or 40 episodes of a particular show. And then I took a podcasting course. If people don't know what we're talking about, there's a podcasting course, which has nothing to do with the podcaster community that we're talking about. So I took this course, And I was in basically this virtual space with like 500 people who were rabidly passionate about podcasts. I was like, like losing sleep because it was so cool. And I'm like, I ripped my whole show apart and rewrote the intro, and it was awesome. And about 4 weeks into what's like a 7 weeks of course material and then 2 more months, about 4 weeks in, I went, what's going to happen when this ends? Because I realized how awesome it was to get to be on a journey with other people who were going the same place.
Yeah.
In this case, learning the podcast, I was ahead of the curve, but I was having just as much fun doing all the lessons about, how to do your intro, how to do your trailer. So that's what made me like, I'm a systems builder. I build things, I build communities. I've been doing that forever. So I'm like, ooh, let's build this thing. So the first incarnation didn't work. Long story. Not entirely my fault, but anyway, but this recent one, when I did it again in June, I just think what happened was, now when I did it, there were hundreds and hundreds, or maybe even thousands of people who have now had a chance to meet me in the virtual, those education spaces. And then when I said, hey, I made this, like people went, okay, and like came over and logged in. And that bootstrapped the community. So for me, it was literally, and I say this a lot, it's just an excuse for me to create a space where I know that I can go find people who are rabid about the same topic that I'm rabid about. It's the exact same story that you were just saying about, like, I went there and I had a question and they answered it. And so it's super fun. I just posted a question like in a private message about this periodical I was looking for that's in the art criticism realm, and there's like a podcaster who does that, and I messaged him and he sent me some things, and I'm just like, I would never have been able to find that answer, a couple of breadcrumbs, if I hadn't had access to these hundreds of podcasters who were just like, oh yeah, I happen to know that. So it was just about finding a group of others who were going the same place as me or thinking about going the same place. So.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that makes a big difference. Having people that you can talk about and
the other one, war stories, right? Like people are like,
totally.
is anybody else getting spammed by, and like there's the link, because if you're, all the people who are podcasters are going rolling their eyes, but people who don't know, when you become a podcaster, your email address winds up getting out published in the wild. And all of a sudden you start getting all these, it's like, so that we run them up the flagpole. Hey, I got this thing. Is this crap or what's going on? And they're like, oh, we all got that. Just ignore it. So it's kind of like the teacher's lounge sort of thing where everyone's just like, all right, where are the donuts? And we have like virtual get-togethers. We meet once a month and just chew the fat and stuff. So, all right. But I'm watching our time slip away, as much as I hate to say it every time. I think that's probably a great place for us to stop. Matt? I think, any parting words?
Well, thanks for having me. And
my pleasure. Now we do the thanks, the battle of the thanks again.
Battle of the thanks.
What a delightful problem to have, right? All
Definitely.
Right. Have a great day, Matt. Bye.
Bye.